Space is cold, cruel, and mostly indifferent to your existence. A bit like my ex, now that I think about it. Anyway, this chunk of metal known as the Reliant was where I, Taryn Orlan, and my merry band of scavengers found ourselves on a Tuesday, which in space felt exactly like every other day. The Reliant was a satellite metropolis, or at least it used to be before some genius decided to test a new kind of bomb there. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well. Imagine a city, now picture that city wrapped in tinfoil, dunked in a vat of acid and left to marinate for a few decades. That's the Reliant. "Hey, Taryn, I think I found something," hollered Kaz, my second in command and the only person who could find a needle in a cosmic haystack. If he wasn't drunk, which he usually was. "Please tell me it's something shiny and not another pile of radioactive junk," I replied, navigating through the debris that could just as easily be a monument to humanity's bad decisions. Kaz grinned, holding up what looked like a golden statue of a very confused chicken. "It's art. Or dinner, depending on how you look at it. Kaz, I'm going to need you to work on distinguishing between the two," I said, squinting at the metallic poultry. "But you know, given the state of things, you might be onto a new gourmet trend." Our job was simple: salvage what we could, sell it, and try not to die in the process. Most days, we barely managed the first two, and the third was always up for negotiation. "Taryn, you gotta see this," piped in Rix, a wiry kid with a penchant for hacking and making terrible life choices, like joining my crew. We followed Rix's voice through a labyrinth of twisted beams and shattered windows until we found him in what used to be a control room. Monitors flickered with static, casting ghostly shadows across his face. "What am I looking at here?" I asked, surveying the screens. "Pilgrims," Rix said, pointing at one of the monitors displaying a steady stream of shuttles heading towards Earth. "And a lot of them, great. As if the universe wasn't crowded enough, now we've got tourists," Kaz said, plopping himself on a half-melted console. "Not tourists," Rix corrected. "Pilgrims." "There's a big difference. Tourists just annoy you. Pilgrims are on a mission to change their lives or something. Mostly they just end up changing everyone else's for the worse." I scratched my chin, not liking the sound of this. Why's everyone suddenly interested in Earth? Last I checked, it was a radioactive wasteland with a side of mutant wildlife. Rix tapped a few keys, pulling up a grainy broadcast from some loon in a robe claiming Earth's rebirth was nigh. "Looks like there's a new cult in town. They're calling it the New Dawn. Apparently, Earth's the next big thing spiritually." I snorted. "Spiritual Mecca, my ass." "Next thing you know, they'll be selling t-shirts." Kaz chuckled, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Taryn, you thinking what I'm thinking?" I sighed. "Yeah, I'm thinking we just got ourselves a new kind of payday, or a new kind of headache. Possibly both." The comms crackled, a familiar static-laden voice interrupting our brainstorming session. "Orlan, you there?" It was Cora, our information broker, who had the uncanny ability to know everything about everyone except how to mind her own business. "I'm here, Cora. What's the news? More cults, plague. You know how I love surprises." Her laughter was like gravel being poured slowly through a sieve. "You're in luck. Got some intel on this New Dawn business. Turns out they're not just your run-of-the-mill doomsayers. They're actually organized and they've got backing." I frowned. "Backing? From who? No idea yet. But someone's keen on turning Earth into their own personal Vatican." Kaz made a face like he was sucking on a lemon. "Great. Any chance this backing comes with a paycheck?" Cora chuckled again. "Depends. You up for some recon work? Might lead to something lucrative if you play your cards right." I glanced at Kaz and Rix, their faces a mix of anticipation and resigned acceptance. "All right, Cora. Count us in. But if this turns out to be another wild goose chase, I'm charging double. Wouldn't have it any other way, Orlan. Stay alive out there." I cut the comms, staring at the screens again. Dust motes floated through beams of pale light, settling into the silence that followed. Kaz stretched, yawning. "So Earth, huh? Guess we're going home after all. Wonder if they've cleaned up since last time, knowing humanity. Probably made it worse, I muttered, grabbing my gear. But hey, maybe we'll get lucky and find something useful this time. Rix hopped off a console, already itching to hack into something. Like a cure for idiocy, I grinned, clapping a hand on his shoulder. Nah, that's beyond even our tech. But a treasure map to some forgotten gold wouldn't hurt. As we made our way back to our ship, I couldn't shake the feeling that this new dawn business was going to be more trouble than it was worth. But then again, trouble was just about the only constant in this universe, right behind death and taxes. Climbing aboard the Dust Devil, our trusty, if slightly malfunctioning, ship, I caught Kaz eyeing the cockpit with skepticism. You think the old girl can handle another trip? I patted the wall affectionately. Depends on if she feels like cooperating today. You know how temperamental she gets. Kaz laughed. Yeah, like a spacefaring diva. I settled into the pilot's seat, flipping switches and pressing buttons with the kind of familiarity only desperation could breed. All right, Dust Devil, one more time with feeling. Let's go see what Earth's got in store for us. The engines roared to life, and for a moment I imagined I could hear the ship grumbling about being woken up. The stars streaked by as we left the Reliant behind, a forgotten relic of humanity's ambition now only good for scavengers and ghosts. As the Dust Devil settled into the inky black, I let my thoughts drift to the pilgrims, the cult, and all the ways this could end badly for us. Hey, Terran, Kaz said, breaking the silence. You ever wonder why we do this? I snorted. What, live in a tin can, risk our necks for scraps and generally make poor life choices? Kaz nodded. Yeah, exactly that. I leaned back, watching the stars blur past. Because we're human, Kaz. We've got a knack for making things complicated. And besides, where's the fun in playing it safe? He chuckled, shaking his head. Fair enough. Here's to more bad decisions. Rix, listening in, raised a mock toast. And to the inevitable consequences, I joined in, grinning despite myself. May they be interesting ones. As we sped towards Earth, I had a feeling we were about to get more interesting than any of us bargained for. Turns out I was right. But then, that's a story for another day. In the vast emptiness of space, where silence is the loudest sound, the Dust Devil hummed its discontent as we approached Earth. The ship, much like a grumpy old man, preferred to be left alone than dragged into another misadventure. I could relate. You sure this is a good idea? Terran, Kaz slurred, the scent of stale booze lingering on his breath. Going back to Earth, I mean. Last time we were there, things got crispy. Oh, ye of little faith, I replied, not taking my eyes off the monitor showing our descent. What's life without a little risk? Besides, Earth's not all bad, just mostly. Kaz snorted, leaning back into his chair as if it might swallow him whole and save him from what was coming. You're an optimist, you know that. Someone's got to be, I shot back. Rix, you got us a landing spot cleared. Rix, tapping away at his tablet like a concert pianist with a caffeine addiction, nodded. Cleared as it's gonna be. Which is to say, not very. But hey, we're not here for a vacation, right? Right, I said, as the Dust Devil shuddered like a drunk at last call. All right, Nix Varkun, let's see what you've got for us. Nix Varkun was an enigma wrapped in a mystery wrapped in a whole lot of trouble. I'd heard stories. Hell, everyone had. The kind of stories that crawled under your skin and made a nest there. If half of what I'd heard was true, she was someone you wanted on your side in a fight. Or, at the very least, someone you wanted to keep an eye on. Touchdown was less like a gentle landing and more like an awkward thud that left us all checking to make sure our teeth were still in place. Earth's surface greeted us with its typical charm, a mix of ruined landscapes and air that tasted like burnt toast. Ah, home sweet home. Remember, I said, standing at the airlock, we're here to get the lay of the land. Find out what this cult is really after. Try not to make it worse. Kaz gave a mock salute. Not making things worse is my specialty. Could have fooled me, Rix muttered, earning a playful shove from Kaz as the hatch swung open. We stepped out into the wasteland that was once the pinnacle of human achievement. Now it was just a mess of broken dreams and radioactive dust, the kind of place that made you thankful for the little things, like working air filters. Nix Varkun, as it turned out, had chosen to meet us in what used to be a shopping mall. It was the kind of place where ambitions went to die long before the bombs ever fell. Now, it was just a hollow shell with sunlight filtering through cracks like fingers of a ghost. Nyx was waiting for us, perched atop a crumbling escalator that had long stopped moving. She was tall, with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything and a smile that promised nothing but trouble. "Terran Orlan," she called out, her voice echoing off the walls as I live and breathe. "I heard you were dead." I spread my arms wide. "Sorry to disappoint." "Oh, not at all," she said, leaping down the steps with the grace of someone who didn't know they could break a leg doing that. "Alive is much more useful. Dead, I'd have to drag you around, and I'm not in the mood for heavy lifting." Kaz leaned over to me. "Charming." Rix nodded. In a might-stab-you kind of way, Nyx approached, eyeing us up like a butcher sizing up a cut of meat. "So you're interested in the new dawn?" "Interested is a strong word," I replied. "Let's say." "Morbidly curious," she chuckled, a sound like a knife being sharpened. "Well, curious or not, you're in the right place. This cult, they're not just after spiritual enlightenment. They've got a plan." "Plans are trouble," Kaz interjected. "Especially the kind that involve Earth." Nyx nodded. "True. But that's where things get interesting. They're not just after whatever spiritual nonsense they're spewing. They're looking for something specific, something old." I raised an eyebrow. "Old? Like what artifacts?" she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Ancient tech. Stuff that predates even the oldest of Earth's history." Rix perked up at that. "You mean there's tech here that's older than dirt?" Nyx grinned. "Older than dirt and twice as deadly. They think it's the key to something." "Bigger? Bigger how?" I asked, my curiosity piqued despite my better judgment. "Bigger as in power," Nyx said. "The kind that could shift the balance of everything. If they find it, they'll have more than just Earth. They'll have control." I glanced at Kaz and Rix. This was bigger than we'd bargained for. Typical. "So, what's your angle in all this, Nyx?" She shrugged, her eyes never leaving mine. "Let's just say I don't like the idea of megalomaniacs running around with ancient weapons. Call it a civic duty." I snorted. "That's a new one. Saving the universe out of the goodness of your heart, more like saving it so I can keep charging rent," she replied. "Besides, I figured you'd want to know what you're up against before you get in over your head." Kaz scratched his chin, looking thoughtful for once. "Sounds like a lot of work for something that doesn't pay." "Oh, but it does," Nyx countered. "If you know where to look." Rix tilted his head. "And you do." Nyx gave a slow, lazy smile. "I have my sources. Question is, are you in or out?" I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck as I weighed our options. Trouble had a way of finding us, but this felt like the kind of trouble that could pay off. Or kill us. Probably both. "In," I said finally. "But let's make one thing clear. If this goes sideways, I'm not going down without a fight." "Good," Nyx said, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "I wouldn't want it any other way." With our tenuous partnership established, we followed Nyx through the ruins, her footsteps sure and steady despite the uncertainty of the ground beneath us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into something much bigger than any of us realized. "So, Nyx," Kaz called from the back. "What's the plan?" "Plan's simple," she replied, glancing back with that shark smile. "We find what they're looking for before they do, and then we make sure they don't use it." "And how do we do that?" Rix asked, always the practical one. Nyx winked. Carefully. As we delved deeper into the ruins, I couldn't help but wonder if we were in over our heads. But there was no turning back now, not with the stakes laid bare. Whatever the new dawn wanted, it was dangerous. And if there was one thing I'd learned in all my years of scavenging, it was that danger had a way of finding you, whether you wanted it to or not. The air grew colder as we descended into the bowels of what once might have been a thriving city. Darkness clung to the walls like a persistent X, refusing to let go even as we pushed forward. "What's that?" Rix asked, his voice echoing into the void as he pointed to a cluster of glowing shapes in the distance. Nyx squinted. "Those are data nodes, old but still functional. We can use them to track down where the cult might have set up shop." Kaz raised an eyebrow. "You trust ancient tech to lead us right to them?" Nyx shrugged. "Got a better idea?" I stepped forward, examining the nodes. They hummed softly, a low thrum that echoed in my bones. Let's see what they've got. Rix got to work, fingers dancing over the controls with the kind of focus normally reserved for avoiding hangovers. These things are older than Kaz's jokes, he muttered, earning a half-hearted glare. Just make it work, I said, feeling the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders like an unwelcome guest. A screen flickered to life, displaying a map of the area. Red blips dotted the surface, each one marking a potential cult site. Looks like they've spread out, Rix observed. Smart move. Makes it harder to hit them all at once. Nick studied the map, her brow furrowed. They're either smart or desperate. Maybe both. Desperate is dangerous, Kaz pointed out. Believe me, I know. Then we'll have to be more dangerous, I said, setting my jaw with determination. Let's start with the nearest site and work our way out. Maybe we'll get lucky, Nix nodded, already on the move. Luck's got nothing to do with it. It's all about determination, and not getting dead, Rix added, packing up his gear. We moved out, each step taking us closer to the unknown. The thought of what lay ahead was as thrilling as it was terrifying. As we navigated the ruins, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on us, watching our every move. Paranoia was as much a part of our lives as breathing, but this felt different, more real. You feel that? Kaz asked, shivering despite the sweat on his brow. Yeah, I replied, keeping my voice low. Stay sharp. Our path took us through narrow alleys and over crumbling structures that threatened to take us down with them. The air was thick with tension, each step a gamble. Finally, we arrived at the first site. It was an old industrial complex, long abandoned and now repurposed by the cult. A place where shadows loomed larger than life and danger lurked in every corner. Welcome to the party, Nick said, her tone laced with sarcasm as she gestured to the complex. Looks cozy, Kaz observed. Think they've got snacks only if you're into cyanide, Rix replied, scanning the area for threats. We crept closer, keeping to the shadows as we approached. The building loomed over us, a hulking reminder of what once was. Got visual, Rix reported, peering through a pair of binoculars. Looks like they've got guards. Armed but not expecting company, Nick smirked. Perfect. Let's give them a surprise. With a plan forming, we prepared to make our move. Whatever lay inside, we'd face it head-on, just like we always did. As we slipped into the shadows, ready to face whatever the new dawn had in store, I couldn't help but think about the stakes. The cult, the artifacts, the danger. This was a game with high odds and higher risks. But if there was one thing we thrived on, it was risk. And maybe, just maybe, we'd come out of this with more than just scars. Only time would tell. The industrial complex loomed over us like a drunken uncle at a family reunion, unpredictable and likely to fall on you if you weren't careful. Nix led the way, her steps confident as if she had a personal vendetta against derelict facilities. Kaz, Rix, and I tailed her, moving through shadows and praying our collective luck held out longer than our patience. Inside, the place was a testament to poor life choices. Rusty catwalks crisscrossed above us, precarious and creaking, while the ground was a minefield of debris and forgotten machinery. The cult had set up shop here, judging by the faint chanting that echoed through the cavernous space, like the world's worst Gregorian choir. So, Nix, Kaz whispered, these guys take requests. Maybe something with a little more. Hope, if by hope you mean high explosives, Nix replied, ducking behind a pile of scrap. They might be more accommodating than you'd think. I crouched beside her, peeking over the edge. How many are we dealing with? Enough to make this a bad idea, Rix said, squinting through a pair of thermal goggles. But when has that ever stopped us? Optimism, Kaz muttered. Our favorite brand of stupidity. Nix scanned the room, her eyes narrowing on a cluster of zealots gathered around an altar. They were all dressed in the kind of robes that screamed, I've given up on personal hygiene, focusing intently on something that looked like a glowing orb of death. That's bad news, I said, gesturing to the orb. Whatever that is, I don't want it getting any closer to functioning. It's powering something, Nix said, eyes fixed on the scene. These idiots might not know how to brush their teeth, but they've tapped into some serious tech. Great, Kaz deadpanned. As if fanatics weren't bad enough, now they're techno-fanatics. We've got to get closer, I said, hating the idea but knowing we had no choice. Rix, think you can disable that thing from here? Rix shook his head, frustration etched on his face. I'd need to be closer. Tech like that might as well be magic from this distance. Magic, Kaz snorted. Yeah, that's the word I'd use for doomsday devices. Well, let's get moving, Nix drawled, already up and stalking towards the shadows like a cat with a vendetta. No time like the present to risk your life for no reward. We moved as one, blending into the gloom as we approached the altar. The zealots in their rapture didn't notice a thing, too busy chanting and swaying like they were at a particularly bad rave. Okay, here's the plan, I whispered, as we huddled behind a rusting support beam. Nix, you and Kaz create a distraction. Rix and I will get in close and shut that thing down. And if we fail, Rix asked, ever the realist, then we hope like hell that old saying about dying with your boots on is true, Kaz said with a grim smile. Nix nodded, her eyes alight with mischief. Let's give them a show they won't forget. Kaz and Nix darted off, stealthy as ghosts with murderous intent. Rix and I watched as they circled around, preparing to draw attention away from our little suicide mission. Ready? I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Not even a little, Rix replied, clutching his tools like a lifeline. Let's do this before I change my mind. With that less than inspiring pep talk, we slunk towards the altar. The chanting grew louder, filling the air like a miasma of bad ideas and worse intentions. Kaz and Nix chose that moment to spring into action. There was a crash, followed by shouts and the unmistakable sound of gunfire. The zealots, predictable as ever, scattered in panic, leaving the altar momentarily unguarded. Now, I hissed, and Rix and I sprinted forward, sliding to a stop beside the glowing orb. Up close it was somehow even uglier than expected, like a disco ball with homicidal tendencies. Can you shut it down? I asked, scanning the room for returning cultists. Working on it, Rix said, his fingers a blur over the device's control panel. This thing's a nightmare of old tech. It's like trying to decode a toddler's temper tantrum. Well, do it faster, I urged, hearing footsteps approaching. As if sensing our presence, the orb began to pulse, its glow intensifying with a low hum that rattled my teeth. Rix cursed under his breath, his hands moving with frantic precision. Then, as if we didn't have enough problems, a zealous acolyte appeared, eyes wild and teeth bared like a feral animal. He lunged at us with the fervor of a televangelist on payday. I reacted on instinct, swinging a metal rod I'd found like a baseball bat. The makeshift weapon connected with the zealot's head with a sickening thud, sending him sprawling. Nice swing, Rix commented, not looking up from his work. Thanks, I said, trying to ignore the way my stomach churned. The orb's hum reached a fever pitch, and Rix worked faster, his face set in a mask of concentration. Sweat dripped down his brow as he muttered to himself, the words lost in the cacophony. Come on, I urged, my eyes flicking between the altar and the chaos unfolding around us. A moment later, Rix let out a triumphant laugh. Got it. With a final twist of his wrist, the orb's glow faded, its hum dying to a whisper before falling silent. The room seemed to exhale, the tension broken like a fever. Nice work, I said, clapping Rix on the shoulder. Let's get out of here. We turned to flee, our path clear now that the altar was no longer a beacon of bad news. Nix and Kaz were already making their way back to us, grins plastered on their faces despite the danger. Looks like you managed not to blow us up, Nix drawled, her eyes glinting with approval. For now, Rix replied, still riding the high of success. Kaz clapped him on the back. See, not getting dead is a skill. Let's move, I said, leading the way back through the shadows. I'd rather not stick around for an encore. As we retreated, the cultists began to regroup, their chants turning to cries of anger and confusion. We slipped away, leaving chaos in our wake like a particularly enthusiastic poltergeist. Outside, the night air was crisp and biting, a welcome relief after the stifling confines of the industrial complex. We paused to catch our breath, the adrenaline still thrumming through our veins. "One down, several to go," Nick said, stretching like a cat that just ate the canary. "Yeah, but each time we do this, we get one step closer to finding out what they are really after," I replied, my mind already racing with possibilities. "And one step closer to getting killed," Kaz added, ever the optimist. "We've faced worse," I said, more to convince myself than anyone else. Nick smirked. "You say that like it's a good thing. I'm just saying," I replied. "We've got experience with bad situations, and we keep surviving them," Rix pointed out. "Barely," Kaz grumbled. "We're doing more than just surviving," I said, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. "We're pushing back. And that counts for something." "Yeah," Nix agreed, her voice softer now. "It does." We fell into silence, each of us lost in our thoughts as we made our way back to the Dust Devil. The ship was a welcome sight, its battered hull as familiar and comforting as an old pair of boots. As we boarded, I couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. The cult might have ancient tech and fervor on their side, but we had something they didn't: each other. And as long as we stuck together, maybe, just maybe, we'd make it through this in one piece. The Dust Devil rumbled to life beneath us, a grumpy beast roused from its slumber. Rix took the helm, guiding us away from the complex and into the night sky. "Next stop?" Kaz asked, settling into his seat with a sigh. "Figure we'll head back to the Reliant," I said, already planning our next move. "See if we can find any leads on the other sites. And if the cult decides to follow us home," Nix asked, raising an eyebrow. "Then we'll give them a welcome they won't forget," I replied, grinning despite myself. Kaz chuckled, shaking his head. "I swear, one day your optimism's gonna get us all killed." "Maybe," I said, leaning back in my seat, "but today's not that day." With that, we set course for the Reliant, the stars stretching out before us like a promise. We had a long road ahead, filled with danger and uncertainty at every turn. But if there was one thing I'd learned from all this, it was that we were more than capable of facing whatever the universe threw our way. And as the Dust Devil carried us through the void, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Because even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for something better. And we intended to find it. We were back aboard the Dust Devil, which was like being inside a tin can with delusions of grandeur, when the grim reality of our situation finally started to sink in. Resources were dwindling faster than Kaz's patience, and our hopes of infiltrating the cult seemed about as solid as a politician's promise. "We need a plan," I said, breaking the heavy silence. It was the kind of silence that suggested everyone was either asleep or contemplating the meaning of life, and given our current predicament, it was probably the latter. "A plan," Kaz threw his hands up in mock exasperation. "Why not just ask for a miracle while we're at it?" Nix, our fearless leader, or at least the closest thing we had to one, leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. "We've got to figure out what that cult is really up to. And we've got to do it without getting ourselves killed, preferably. Rix echoed, adjusting his thermal goggles like they might offer a clearer view of our impending doom. The Dust Devil hummed beneath us like a disgruntled beast of burden, its systems flickering with the kind of reliability you'd expect from a decades-old coffee maker. And the coffee it brewed would probably taste the same as our chances of survival, bitter and burnt. "Resources ain't exactly plentiful," I said, stating the obvious. "We're running on fumes here," Kaz snorted. "Fumes, optimism, and dumb luck. The trifecta of great planning." Nix shot him a glare that could have melted steel. "Less sarcasm, more solutions." "Fine," Kaz said, rolling his eyes. "We could try infiltrating their ranks. You know, the whole cult from within routine." Rix chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling down a hill. "Yeah, because we blend in so well with the robe-wearing, teeth-avoiding crowd. It's not as crazy as it sounds," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. "If we can pass ourselves off as new recruits, we might get close enough to gather intel. And when they figure out we're not one of them," Kaz asked, raising an eyebrow. "Then we improvise," Nix said, with the kind of steely resolve that made you believe we might actually pull it off. "We've faced worse." Name one time, Kaz challenged, crossing his arms. Yesterday, Nyx replied, a smirk tugging at her lips. Fair point, Kaz conceded. But we'll need disguises, and a way to get past their surveillance, Rix added, glancing at the makeshift radar system we'd cobbled together from spare parts. It worked about as well as a screen door on a submarine. Their tech is old, but it's pervasive, Nyx said, tapping her fingers against her chin. They've got eyes everywhere, so we'll blind them, I suggested. A little electronic sleight of hand. Rix perked up, his interest piqued. I can work with that. A few well-placed signals could mess with their feeds, make it look like we're somewhere we're not. Perfect, Nyx said, nodding. Terran, Kaz, you're on disguise duty. Make us look like true believers, Kaz groaned. Great, I've always wanted to see how I'd look with a cultist's sense of style. Just don't overdo it, I said. We want to blend in, not win best-dressed zealot. And what's your role in this little charade? Kaz asked, a challenging glint in his eye. I'll be the one to get us out if things go sideways, I replied, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. Good, Nyx said. We move at dawn. Get some rest, folks. Tomorrow we dive into the lion's den. At least lions have the courtesy to eat you quickly, Kaz muttered, heading off to find a quiet corner to brood in. I stayed behind with Nyx as the others dispersed, the weight of the mission settling onto my shoulders like a lead blanket. Think we can pull this off? I asked, needing her reassurance almost as much as air. Nyx gave me a sideways glance, her expression unreadable. We've got to. Otherwise, what's all this been for? Right, I said, feeling the pressure of her words. Tomorrow then. Tomorrow, she echoed, her voice carrying the promise and threat of what was to come. The night dragged on, time stretching like taffy as we prepared to infiltrate a world of madness. The dust devil's hum lulled us into a restless sleep, the kind where dreams and reality blur into a mess of anxiety and anticipation. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it a chill that seeped into our bones. We suited up, donning the tattered robes we'd scavenged from the Reliance refuse piles. Kaz grumbled the entire time, muttering about the indignity of smelling like unwashed zealot. Nyx took a deep breath, her eyes scanning each of us like a captain before a battle. Everyone ready as a turkey at Thanksgiving, Kaz quipped, though his usual flippancy was tinged with tension. Let's do this, Rix said, giving his gear a final once-over. We approached the cult's compound under the cover of early morning shadows, the air thick with the promise of impending disaster. Nyx led the way, her steps confident and sure, as if she were born to walk into danger. The exterior of the compound was a patchwork of crumbling concrete and rusted metal, a fitting testament to the madness it housed. Surveillance cameras dotted the perimeter, their lenses sweeping methodically. Now or never, Rix whispered, fingers dancing over a handheld jammer. With a flick of a switch, the device emitted a low hum, scrambling the camera's signals. That's our cue, I said, pulling my hood lower. Everyone act natural. Define natural when you're trying not to get caught, Kaz said, his steps faltering as we approached the gate. Just look like you belong, Nyx said, her voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos of our thoughts. We passed the perimeter with hearts pounding in unison, the thrill of danger a heady mix of fear and adrenaline. Inside, the compound was a maze of corridors and chambers, the air heavy with incense and the murmur of prayers. Our disguises must have been passable because no one gave us a second glance. A few cultists shuffled past, their eyes glazed with fanaticism. It was like staring into the abyss, only to have it stare back with a vacant, unnerving intensity. We need to find their leader, Nyx said, her voice barely audible. He'll have answers, and a nice collection of skulls, probably, Kaz added, peering around a corner. We navigated the labyrinthine halls, keeping our heads down and our expressions blank. The cult's inner sanctum was a strange fusion of religious fervor and technological wonder, every chamber a testament to their twisted devotion. There, Rix whispered, pointing to a door guarded by two of the more burly zealots. Bet that's where the head honcho is. Great, I muttered. Getting past them will be a cakewalk. We've faced worse, Nyx reminded us, her eyes alight with a challenge. No pressure, right? Kaz said, adjusting his robe as if it might make him more convincing. Nyx stepped forward, her demeanor shifting to one of authority. "Brothers," she called, her voice echoing in the chamber. "We've come from the outer sanctum with news for our leader." The guards exchanged glances, suspicion clouding their features. "What news?" one demanded, his voice a gravelly rasp. "News of the infidels," Nyx said smoothly. "We've captured some, and they're ready for judgment." The guard's eyes narrowed, but he seemed to buy it. With a reluctant nod, he gestured for us to pass. "I can't believe that worked," Kaz whispered as we slipped through the door. Inside, the chamber was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of incense and sweat. At the far end, a figure sat upon an ornate throne, draped in robes that gleamed like oil on water. The cult leader, a wiry man with eyes like polished obsidian, watched our approach with a predatory curiosity. New acolytes, or spies, his voice was a silken purr, each word sharpened to a point. Nyx stepped forward, every inch the fearless leader we needed her to be. "Acolytes, my lord. We seek enlightenment," the leader chuckled, the sound a razor's edge. "Enlightenment comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it?" "We are," Nyx said, her voice steady, though I could see the tension in her stance. "Then prove it," the leader said, gesturing to a table laden with ancient relics and devices. "Choose one and demonstrate your faith." We exchanged glances, each of us weighing the risk. It was a test, and we were the mice caught in the labyrinth. I stepped forward, heart hammering in my chest. I reached for a device that looked like it might have once been a communication tool, its surface etched with runes. If our hunch was right, it held the key to their secrets. The leader watched me, his eyes narrowing. "You are bold," he said, though whether it was a compliment or a warning, I couldn't tell. I nodded, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "Faith demands boldness." He let out a dark chuckle, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Very well, show me your faith." I held the device, praying it was dormant, that we could use it to our advantage. Nyx had a plan, one she hadn't shared, but I trusted her instincts more than anything. In that moment, I realized something fundamental. We were playing with fire in a room full of explosives. One wrong move and we'd all go up in flames. The leader leaned back, watching us with the detached interest of a cat toying with its prey. "Impress me." I took a deep breath, readying myself for whatever came next. "With pleasure," I said, and hoped like hell we'd make it out alive. Kaz, ever the pessimist, snuck a whisper my way. "Here's to not dying horribly." "Cheers to that," I replied, and with my free hand I gave him a thumbs up. Because if nothing else, we were in this together, for better or worse. And as the leader's gaze bore into us, I couldn't help but think we might just stand a chance. If we didn't, at least we'd go down swinging. In a world gone mad, that was the best you could hope for. The throne room's dim light flickered like a dying bulb, casting sinister shadows that danced across the walls. You could almost hear them chuckle at our misfortune, mocking us for daring to think we might pull this off. But here we were, standing before the cult leader like lambs before the slaughter, armed with nothing but our wits and a prayer that wasn't getting past the ceiling. The cult leader's eyes, sharp as a butcher's blade, tracked my every move. Nyx stood beside me, the picture of calmness, though I knew her mind was working overtime. Kaz and Rix flanked her, looking about as comfortable as cats in a bathtub. "So, what's the next step in your little test of faith?" I asked, giving the leader my best impression of a man on the edge of a nervous breakdown. His smile was fuller than a hacker's inbox. "A demonstration," he purred, gesturing to the device I clutched. "Show it to me, prove you're worthy." I had nothing, no plan, no clue. Just the vague notion that if I flipped this thing on, we'd either be vaporized or hailed as the next messiah. "You ever think loyalty is overrated?" I muttered out the side of my mouth to Nyx. "Only every day," she replied without missing a beat. I fiddled with the device, pretending to know what I was doing. The thing was older than Earth's first cockroach, but I had a feeling its secrets were more explosive. "Here goes nothing," I said, twisting a knob that looked like it might not kill us. The machine whirred to life, lights flashing erratically like a disco from hell. The cult leader's grin widened, as if he was watching a particularly entertaining gladiator match. "Impressive," he said, though the way he said it made me feel like I was 2 steps from getting skewered. Now let's see if you can handle the full power of belief. A loud bang echoed through the chamber, and I realized Kaz had found his moment. He lobbed something small and metallic towards the back of the room. It exploded with a flash, a smoke bomb, not lethal but enough to scramble the senses. "Run!" Nix shouted, and we bolted, throwing caution and dignity to the winds. Rix had already taken point, his thermal goggles glowing like the eyes of some mythical beast as he led us through the smoke-filled chaos. We crashed through the door, the weight of the cult's fury hot on our heels. Alarms blared, the sound a cacophony of failure and impending doom. Behind, the cultists were rallying, their cries rising in a fever pitch, spurred on by fanatical madness. "Where to now?" Kaz yelled, his voice strained as we pounded down the corridors. "Out," Nix replied, stating the obvious with the kind of authority that didn't allow for backtalk. The compound was a maze, twisting passages that seemed designed by a psychopath with a penchant for dead ends. I rounded a corner, barely avoiding a collision with a wall that had no business being there. "How did we even get in here?" I gasped, my lungs burning as we sprinted like our lives depended on it. "They did." "Bad life choices," Rix offered, his voice barely a whisper over the clamor. The cultists were close behind, their footsteps a relentless drumbeat of pursuit. If they caught us, we'd be lucky to end up as nothing more than a footnote in their twisted history. We burst into a larger chamber, the space filled with relics and machinery that would make a pack rat blush. Nix halted, eyes scanning for an exit as if willing one to appear. "Up there," she said, pointing to a rusted ladder that led to the upper levels. "It's our best shot." "Great," Kaz muttered. I always wanted to die on a ladder. We scrambled up, the metal creaking ominously under our weight. It felt like ascending into the sky on the wings of a tin can, fragile and liable to drop us at any moment. Below, the cultists poured into the room, their robed figures swarming like ants with axes to grind. "Keep moving," Nix ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos with the precision of a scalpel. The ladder led to a catwalk, which wasn't so much a catwalk as it was a gaping rust trap suspended over our imminent demise. We made our way across, careful not to look down at the gathered zealots below, their shouts a chorus of promised retribution. "Think they are mad?" Kaz asked, his humor as dark as the pit we were trying to avoid falling into. "They'll get over it," I replied, hoping we'd be long gone by then. The catwalk ended at another door, this one half rust, half stubborn metal. I gave it a kick, the impact jarring my leg more than the door. Rix, ever practical, stepped forward and jimmied it with a tool he pulled from his kit, the lock giving way with a reluctant groan. "After you," he said, waving us through with a mock bow. We burst into the open air, the sky a sickly gray that felt like freedom wrapped in a warning. The compound stretched out below, a testament to madness and misplaced faith. But we had no time to admire the view. Our goal was the dust devil, its silhouette faint on the horizon. We made for it, legs pumping as we bounded over the cracked terrain. The cultists were still behind us, their numbers swelling like a tide of righteous fury. "Any chance they'll just give up?" Kaz asked, breathless but unbowed. "Not likely," Nix replied, her pace unfaltering. "Keep running." The dust devil beckoned, our grumpy, unreliable savior in disguise. If we could reach it, we might have a shot at escape. If not, well, the cultists would likely make sure our last moments were less than pleasant. We reached the ship, Rix already punching in the access codes with the desperation of a man who'd seen one too many horror films. The ramp lowered, creaking like the gates of heaven, or hell, depending on how you looked at it. "Get us out of here," Nix ordered, shoving Kaz and me up the ramp while she covered our retreat. Inside, the ship was a chaos of blaring alarms and flashing lights, the dust devil roused from its slumber and not pleased about it. "Come on, you piece of junk," I muttered, coaxing the controls to life as Kaz took the co-pilot's seat, hands flying over the console with the dexterity of a professional gambler stacking the deck. The engine sputtered to life, the dust devil's old bones shaking with the effort. Outside, the cultists had reached the ship, their hands clawing at the hull as if sheer willpower could drag us back into their clutches. "We're not sticking around for an encore," Kaz said, flipping switches with the precision of a man who knew his fate was inextricably linked with this flying heap of metal. The thrusters roared, lifting us skyward with a jolt that rattled my teeth. Below, the cultists dwindled to ants, their cries swallowed by the vastness of space as we broke free of the planet's pull. "Not dead yet," I said, a statement that felt like both a victory and a defiance. Nyx sank into a chair, her composure unflappable, though I knew the strain had taken its toll. "We need to figure out what they were up to," she said, eyes on the device I still clutched like a talisman. "Whatever it was, it involved a glowing orb of death," Kaz said, his voice light but the words carrying weight. "Their ritual," Rix mused, peering at the device with his thermal goggles still perched on his head. "Think it was meant to do more than impress the faithful." "Can't say I want to know how that ends," I said, securing the device as though it might leap from my hands and strangle us all. "We'll have to go back," Nyx said, and the room fell silent, the implication hanging heavier than a black hole. "We need to stop them, sure," Kaz said, feigning nonchalance. "Just another fun day in paradise." The dust devil hummed around us, a reluctant accomplice in our reckless endeavors. We were flying towards uncertainty, tethered not by fate but by choice, the choice to stand against the darkness, even if it meant getting our hands dirty. And as we sailed through the void, the weight of our mission settled over us once more. We had escaped, but the fight was far from over. The cult might have thought they'd seen the last of us, but they were wrong. Because in the grimdark expanse of space, there's always another fight, another day, another chance to prove that even the most broken of us can still stand, or at least fall with style. I sat in the dust devil's makeshift cockpit, staring at the blinking lights on the console like they were the world's most infuriating Christmas display. Kaz was fiddling with the nav system, his fingers a dance of urgency and profanity. Nyx leaned against the wall, eyes closed but definitely not asleep, more like a cat pretending it's not watching every move. Rix was somewhere behind me, probably trying not to fiddle with anything that could explode. Because, that would just be the cherry on top of our disaster sundae. "So, Earth," I said, breaking the silence that had settled like a bad smell. "The place where the air tastes like burnt toast and everyone's favorite pastime is trying not to die. Sounds like a vacation," Kaz muttered, not taking his eyes off the controls. "Got any other bright ideas, Terran?" "Just one," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "A little light reading." Kaz stopped fiddling and looked at me like I'd just suggested swimming in lava. "Reading. You feeling all right?" "Found something in the ruins," I said, tapping the old data slate clutched in my hand. "Might be our ticket to taking those cultists down a peg, or at least making them wish they'd picked a less explosive hobby." Nyx opened one eye, a brow raised. "And how exactly does outdated Earth junk help us?" "It's not junk," I protested, even though it mostly was. "It's an archive. Hidden in the guts of the industrial complex. Seems our friends in the cult have a few skeletons in their closet, metaphorically speaking." "How metaphorically are we talking?" Rix chimed in, appearing beside me like he'd been summoned by the word skeletons. "Enough to make a difference," I said, waving the slate around like it was the answer to all our problems. Spoiler, it wasn't, but it was a start. "We've got records on what they're using and, more importantly, how to stop it." "Color me intrigued," Kaz said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "But intrigued isn't going to save our skins if we end up as sacrificial offerings." Nyx pushed off from the wall, stretching like she was warming up for a marathon. "All right, Terran, what's the plan?" "Simple," I said, lying through my teeth. "We go back, access the archive, and use the information to dismantle whatever crazy death machine they're building." "Simple," Rick scoffed. "Like fixing a hyperdrive with duct tape and good intentions." "Hey, good intentions are underrated," I said with a half-hearted grin. "Besides, what else are we gonna do? Sit around and wait for them to come knocking again?" "Pass," Kaz said, finally looking up from the console. "So how do we get in without getting dismembered?" There's a maintenance shaft, I explained, flipping through the data slate's display. Should lead us right under their noses. If we're careful, we might even manage it without setting off every alarm in the place. Nyx crossed her arms, skepticism written all over her face. And the catch? Who says there's a catch? I replied, attempting a nonchalant shrug. Because there's always a catch, Nyx said, especially with you. All right, fine, I admitted. The catch is we have to disable their security system from the inside. Kaz let out a low whistle. So, suicide with extra steps. Not necessarily, I said, trying to inject some optimism into my voice. Just needs a little finesse, and some luck. Rix chuckled darkly. Hope you've been stocking up, cause we're fresh out of both. We spent the next few hours going over the plan, each of us contributing equally to the sense of impending doom. By the time the dust devil touched down again on Earth's surface, we were as ready as we were going to get, which was to say, not at all. The maintenance shaft was exactly where the slate indicated, hidden beneath a pile of debris that looked like it had been undisturbed since the dawn of time. Nyx went down first, her silhouette disappearing into the darkness like a whisper. I followed, Kaz and Rix bringing up the rear. The tunnel was cramped, the air stale and heavy, carrying the distant echoes of machinery and the not-so-distant smell of something that could only be described as industrial funk. Just like old times, Kaz muttered, his voice bouncing off the narrow walls. You mean the times when we weren't running for our lives? Rix shot back. We navigated the shaft in silence, each twist and turn bringing us closer to the heart of the complex. The archive was supposed to be located near the center, a bunker of knowledge buried where no one would think to look, or so the slate claimed. You sure this is the right way? Nyx asked, breaking the silence that had settled like a blanket. As sure as I ever am, I replied, which was not at all. The slate says it's just up ahead. The slate better be right, Kaz grumbled. Or we might as well just hand ourselves over. There it was, a door at the end of the passage, rusted and stubborn. Nyx gave it a swift kick, the metal shrieking in protest as it swung open. Beyond was the archive, a room filled with the kind of machines that belonged in a museum or a trash heap. Home sweet home, Rix said, stepping inside and promptly tripping over a cable. Real cozy. Kaz went to work on the security terminal, fingers flying over the keys with the kind of reckless abandon that suggested he was either very confident or very stupid. I was betting on a little of both. All right, he said after a few tense minutes. I've got us a window. Once we're in, we're on borrowed time. Good, Nyx replied. Let's make sure it's worth it. I approached the central console, the heart of the archive, its lights flickering like dying stars. The data slate synced with a beep, old files springing to life on the dusty screen. Here we go, I murmured, scrolling through pages of information that seemed to go on forever. Looks like they've been experimenting with some heavy-duty tech, stuff that could make the glowing orb of death look like a party trick. Think we can use it against them? Rix asked, his eyes scanning the screens with growing interest. That's the plan, I replied, finding a file marked weaknesses. My heart skipped a beat. This might just do the trick. Share with the class, Kaz said, glancing over my shoulder. They are reliant on a central power core, I explained, the words tumbling out in a rush. We take it down and their whole setup goes dark. Nyx nodded, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. But how do we get to it? There's the rub, I admitted, pointing to a detailed schematic of the complex. It's deep in the heart of their operation. We'll need a distraction. Kaz grinned, a mischievous spark lighting up his eyes. Now that I can handle. Good, I said, feeling the fragments of a plan slot into place. Then let's make some noise. With the archive's secrets in hand, we made our escape, retracing our steps through the labyrinthine tunnels. The path was eerily quiet, the calm before the storm, and every shadow felt like it held 1,000 threats. Nyx led the way, her movements precise and silent, while Kaz muttered under his breath, a steady stream of curses and promises of what he'd do once we were in the clear. Rix brought up the rear, thermal goggles now pushed up onto his forehead, eyes scanning for anything out of place. We emerged from the maintenance shaft like ghosts, slipping back into the world above with little more than a whisper. The complex loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the sky, its occupants blissfully unaware of the chaos about to descend upon them. "All right," I said, adrenaline singing in my veins. "Let's kick the hornet's nest." Kaz set off towards the perimeter, his task clear: make enough noise to wake the dead, or at least get every cultist running in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, Nix, Rix, and I would make our way to the power core, using the chaos as cover. The first explosion echoed across the ruins, a firework of sound and fury. Kaz's handiwork, a distraction that drew the cultists out like moths to a flame. It was our cue, and we sprinted into the complex, hearts racing in tandem with the alarms that wailed to life. The corridors were a blur, our footsteps a staccato beat against the concrete. The power core was deep within, but we'd studied the maps, memorized every twist and turn. We reached the chamber, the core a pulsating mass of technology and madness, cables snaking across the floor like the tentacles of some monstrous beast. It hummed with power, the air around it crackling with energy. "Just like we planned," Nix said, her voice steady, eyes locked on the prize. I approached the terminal, fingers flying across the keys. The system fought back, defenses rising to stop us, but I was relentless, guided by the knowledge we'd wrested from the archive. As the countdown began, the core shuddered, lights flickering like a dying star. We backed away, the roar of the cultists growing louder, their cries a frantic chorus of realization and rage. "Time to go," Nix said, her grip on my arm firm as she pulled me away. We ran, the walls trembling as the core's defenses faltered, its energy spiraling out of control. The chaos we'd unleashed was a living thing, consuming everything in its path. We burst into the open air, the complex behind us a symphony of destruction. The dust devil waited, ramp extended like an open arm. Kaz was already inside, waving us on with the urgency of a man who knew we were living on borrowed time. "Let's not stick around for the encore," I said, breathless but alive. The dust devil roared to life, lifting us into the sky with the kind of reluctant grace only it could manage. Below, the cultists scrambled like ants, their plans unraveling in the wake of our escape. As we soared into the blackness of space, I allowed myself a moment of triumph. We'd survived for now. The cult was still out there, a threat looming on the horizon, but we dealt a blow, found a crack in their armor. And in a universe where everything seemed hell-bent on grinding us down, a small victory felt like a win, even if it was just for today. "Not bad for day's work," Kaz said, settling into his seat with a weary grin. Nix nodded, her eyes meeting mine with a silent promise. "Let's just hope it's enough." Rix chuckled, shaking his head. "Enough for now, maybe. But there's always tomorrow." I couldn't help but smile despite the weight of what lay ahead, because in the grimdark expanse of space, tomorrow was all we could ever count on. And sometimes that was enough. The dust devil's cockpit smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, and I couldn't help but think it was a perfect reflection of our lives. Kaz fiddled with the nav system, his fingers a blur over the controls. I half expected the nav system to explode in his face, but that was just my usual optimism kicking in. "Remind me again why we're doing this," Kaz said, not looking up. "Because we're masochists," I offered, adjusting the seat that was somehow less comfortable than sitting on a pile of rocks. "Speak for yourself," Rix chimed in, peering through his thermal goggles at a data stream that might as well have been ancient hieroglyphs for all the sense it made. "I just like things that go boom." Nix, ever the silent observer, lounged against the wall with the grace of a cat who'd just found the one sunny spot in a dark room. "We disrupt the cult's ritual, expose their lies, and save the day," she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the universe. "Right, because cultists are known for their rational responses," Kaz muttered, rolling his eyes as the nav system beeped in protest. "Hey, everyone needs a hobby," I said. "Ours just happens to involve saving humanity from crazy space cults." "No big deal." The dust devil shuddered as we hit a pocket of turbulence, the kind that made your stomach leap into your throat. I'd gotten used to the ship's little idiosyncrasies, like how it sometimes decided to fly backwards for no reason. It had character, if you liked your character slightly homicidal. "Okay, let's go over this one more time," I said, trying to sound confident, which I was becoming increasingly good at faking. "We know the cult relies on this glowing orb of death to brainwash their followers. We turn it off. We turn off their power over these poor sods. And how do you plan to do that, O fearless leader?" Kaz asked, sarcasm dripping from his words like oil from a rusty pipe. "With this," I said, holding up a device that looked like it was held together with hope and duct tape. "We plug it into the orb's power source. It shorts everything out." Boom, no more mind control. Rix eyed the device warily. "You sure it won't just blow us to hell?" "Not entirely," I admitted. "But I figure as long as we're standing on the right side of the explosion, we're golden." Nix pushed off the wall, walking over to join us. "And what about the cultists?" "I doubt they'll just stand around and watch. That's the beauty of Kaz's part in this little drama," I said, nodding to our resident tech wizard. "He's going to create a distraction big enough to keep them busy." Kaz grinned, a feral sort of smile that promised chaos. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." "Good," Nix said, her voice steady and calm, which was more than I could say for myself. The dust devil finally settled into a somewhat stable orbit over Earth, and we prepared to drop back into the hellscape we just left. I always found it amazing that even after everything that had happened to Earth, people still found a way to make it worse. The Reliant loomed below us, a testament to humanity's stubborn refusal to let go of a good idea, even when it blew up in our faces, literally. We'd have to make our way through the industrial complex, avoid getting caught, and shut down a cult's power source. Easy as pie, assuming the pie was made of razor blades and bad intentions. "All right, kids," I said, trying to muster some enthusiasm. "Let's go save the galaxy, one delusional cult at a time." We descended back to the surface, the dust devil setting us down with all the grace of a drunken elephant. The maintenance shaft was still there, hidden beneath debris that looked like it had been rearranged by an especially resentful janitor. "Ladies first," Kaz said, gesturing grandly as Nix rolled her eyes and once again led the way into the darkness. The tunnels were just as cramped and unpleasant as before, although this time I was starting to think they smelled even worse. We moved quickly, each of us lost in our own thoughts, the reality of the situation pressing down on us like the weight of a bad decision. Kaz stopped suddenly, his thermal goggles highlighting a section of wall that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent light. "This is it," he whispered, as if speaking too loudly would make the whole plan come crashing down. Nix nodded, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of movement. "Let's do this." I approached the terminal with the grace of someone who'd just tripped over their own shoelaces, plugging in the device with fingers that trembled more than I'd like to admit. The system hummed to life, and for a moment I thought it was going to work. Then the alarm started blaring. "Well, we had a good run," Rick said, trying for humor but sounding more resigned than anything else. "Plan B?" Kaz asked, already preparing to bolt. "Plan B is run like hell," I said, pulling the device free as sparks flew from the terminal. We took off, the sound of shouting behind us growing louder as the cultists realized they'd been compromised. The corridors blurred around us, the adrenaline making everything sharper and more surreal. We burst into the main chamber, the orb of death pulsating with a sickly glow. Kaz didn't hesitate, tossing a small device at the base of the orb. It exploded in a shower of sparks, cutting the power and plunging the room into darkness. The cultists screamed, their voices a rising tide of panic. Without the orb, their control was gone, and their followers were left blinking in confusion, free of the mental chains that had bound them. "Time to go," Nix said, her voice calm and steady as she urged us on. We ran, the chaos behind us a living thing, consuming everything in its path. The dust devil waited, ramp extended like an open arm, welcoming us back with the promise of escape. Kaz was already inside, the grin on his face fading as the reality of what we'd done settled in. Think they'll remember us? I shook my head, breathless and exhilarated. Not sure I want to find out. The dust devil took off, lifting us into the sky with a roar of engines that shook the very air. Below, the cultists scattered, their plans unraveling in the wake of our escape. As we soared into the blackness of space, I allowed myself a moment of triumph. We'd survived, and more importantly, we'd won. The cult was still a threat, but we'd struck a blow, cracked their armor. Not bad for a day's work, Kaz said, settling into his seat with a weary grin. Nyx nodded, her eyes meeting mine with a silent promise. Let's just hope it's enough. Rix chuckled, shaking his head. Enough for now, maybe. But there's always tomorrow. And for once, tomorrow didn't seem so daunting. We'd faced down a cult, survived against the odds, and lived to tell the tale. In a universe where everything seemed hell-bent on grinding us down, a small victory felt like a win, even if it was just for today. The dust devil hung in orbit like a stubborn stain on the universe's shirt. Below us, the Reliant, the satellite metropolis that had seen better days and worse cults, began to stitch itself back together. Or at least, it would if there was anything like a space seamstress around. For now, the place just looked like a junkyard with ambition. In the cockpit, Kaz was still fiddling with the nav system, muttering something about if it ain't broke, you're not trying hard enough. The nav system gave a disgruntled beep, probably just to spite him. Apparently, old grudges die hard, even when you're made of circuits and bad decisions. Rick sat across from him, eyes glued to his thermal goggles like they were a particularly gripping soap opera. Not that any of us knew what a soap opera looked like, but we imagined it involved a lot of explosions and questionable plot decisions. Looks like the cult's finally getting the memo that their brainwashing orb is offline, Rick said with a grin. About time they got a taste of reality. A bitter pill, I'm sure, I said, leaning back in my seat, trying to ignore the way the springs jabbed into my spine. But hey, sometimes the truth is stranger than their fiction. Nyx was perched on a crate in the corner, watching the others with an expression that was half amusement, half boredom, like a cat watching a laser pointer. Amazing what happens when you take away a cult's cosmic nightlight, she said, her voice dry as a Martian summer. We're just lucky they didn't realize sooner that their so-called divine inspiration was one power surge away from a glorified lava lamp, Kaz added, his fingers dancing over the controls in an improvised symphony of button mashing. The truth was, we'd managed to pull off a miracle, or at least, what passed for one in our line of work. The cult's grip on the Reliant had been loosened, their followers freed from mind control, and we had escaped with our skins mostly intact. If you squinted hard enough, it looked like a victory. Then again, if you squint hard enough, you can see anything, even hope. I watched the planet slowly turn beneath us, its scarred surface a tapestry of humanity's greatest hits, war, pollution, and a landscape that looked like a toddler on a sugar high had gotten hold of a paintbrush. It was hard to imagine what Earth had been like before. Maybe it was better not to try. Better to focus on the now, on the people who still called it home, even when home was more of a suggestion than a reality. Think they'll manage without their puppet master? Rix asked, tapping a rhythm on his thigh that echoed the steady thrum of the engines. People are stubborn, Nyx said, an edge of admiration in her voice. They find ways to adapt, survive, even thrive when they're not busy blowing each other up, Kaz snorted. Survival of the most persistent. Isn't that how the saying goes? Something like that, I agreed. Besides, there's a certain charm to humanity's collective short memory. Give it a few months and they'll probably convince themselves it was all a bad dream. Rix leaned back, chuckling. Well, if nothing else, we've given them a hell of a story to tell their grandkids. Assuming there's anything left of Earth for grandkids, Kaz pointed out, his tone as dry as the dust fields outside. Optimism, my least favorite medication. The dust devil hummed around us, its engines a steady heartbeat in the vast emptiness of space. It was a comforting sound, like an old friend grumbling in the background, reminding us that despite everything we were still here, still fighting, and maybe, just maybe, still winning. "All right, enough of this sentimental crap," I said, standing up and shaking off the last remnants of our desperate escape. "Let's plot a course for somewhere with less cults and more breathable air." Kaz rubbed his hands together, an almost maniacal gleam in his eye. "You got it, fearless leader." One jump to sanity coming right up. Nix chuckled softly, the sound like a whisper of wind on a long-abandoned world. "Sanity's overrated. But I suppose it wouldn't hurt to try." We set our course, the ship responding with its usual reluctance. It might hate us, but it hated being stationary even more. And as much as I loved Earth, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was time for a change. Time to leave behind the ghosts and the ruins and the memories of what once was. As we sailed through the void, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Humanity was tenacious, if nothing else. We'd found ways to endure despite the odds, to create and destroy with equal measure. Perhaps that was our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. "The Reliant's already starting to pick up the pieces," Kaz said, glancing at a monitor that flickered with the images of a city slowly waking from its nightmare. "Think they'll ever let us back in?" Rix asked, a grin playing at the corners of his mouth. "Not if they've got any sense," I replied. "But then, sense is in short supply these days," Nix shrugged. "They'll learn. They always do, or they won't," Kaz added. "Either way, it's out of our hands now." We watched the planet fade into the distance, the darkness of space swallowing it up. A small part of me felt a twinge of regret, a whisper of longing for something I couldn't quite name. But the bigger part, the part that had survived this long against all odds, knew that there was more out there. More to see, more to fight for, more to live for. "So, where to next?" Rix asked, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. "Anywhere but here," I said, grinning despite myself. "And preferably someplace where the locals don't try to kill us on sight." Kaz nodded, tapping a few keys and watching the stars blur into streaks of light. "I hear there's a nice little corner of the galaxy where the cough is hot and the beds don't have lice." "And where would that be?" Nix asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'll let you know when I find it," Kaz replied, flashing a grin. We settled into the familiar rhythm of space travel, the monotony broken only by the occasional jolt of turbulence or the distant flash of a dying star. There was something comforting in the routine, in the knowledge that no matter how far we traveled, we were still chasing the same elusive dream, a better tomorrow. As the dust devil powered through the vastness, I leaned back in my seat, hands behind my head, and let myself relax. We'd faced down a cult and come out the other side, a little worse for wear but still breathing. That was more than most could say, and it was enough for me. Nix glanced over, a hint of a smile on her lips. "You know, for all your cynicism, you're quite the optimist." I shrugged, feeling the weight of 100 lifetimes settle on my shoulders. "Hope's a funny thing. Keeps you going when you've got no reason to, or maybe you're just a sucker for punishment," Kaz offered, his fingers tapping out a rhythm only he could hear. "Maybe," I said, grinning. "But if this is punishment, I'll take it." The ship sailed on, carrying us toward whatever awaited in the uncharted depths of space. We were a ragtag group of misfits and rebels, fighting against the universe's indifference with nothing but our wits and a battered ship. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps it was naive, but it was there, a stubborn flame refusing to be snuffed out by the cold vacuum of reality. As we drifted further from Earth and the Reliant, I let myself imagine a future where we'd find a place to call home, a place where the air didn't taste like burnt toast and the ground didn't tremble beneath our feet, a place where we could finally rest, even if just for a moment. "Think we'll ever find it?" Nix asked, her voice soft and thoughtful. "Find what?" Rix replied, glancing over with curiosity. "Home," Nix said simply. Kaz snorted. "Home's wherever the dust devil decides to land as far as I'm concerned." Maybe, I said, feeling the weight of the universe settle around me like an old, familiar cloak. But I think we'll know it when we see it. We sailed on, the stars our only witnesses, the vastness our only guide. It was a daunting, terrifying thing, this vast expanse of nothingness. But it was also beautiful in its own way. A reminder that we were just small pieces in a puzzle far too big for any one person to solve. And yet, despite that knowledge, we continued, because that's what humans do. We fight, we struggle, we endure. We laugh in the face of impossible odds and we keep going, one step at a time. As the dust devil carried us onward, I couldn't help but smile, because in the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about living, truly living, in a universe that seemed determined to grind us into dust. And that was something worth fighting for.